I'm talking to an employer the other day. They have 20,000 employees in a big construction firm. And the biggest question or the challenge that this employer put to me was, why are young people so lacking in resilience? In other words, why aren't they resilient enough? Here's my answer. The rules of the game have changed completely. If you look at the education system, it is designed for people to be working in assembly lines. It's designed for the Victorian era factory worker. In other words, you do as you're told, and that's it. The game has changed completely because whilst our generation, so I don't know about my guest generation age exactly here from the top of my head, but I think it's probably Gen X like me as well. I was born in 1969, late 69. We suppressed our stuff, and the consequences are massively damaged mental health issues. So, on today's episode of the Young Leaders podcast, I'm joined by Andrew Payne, and we are going to talk about the testosterone crisis. Now, this isn't just for men, by the way, just keep that in mind. It's actually vital that females listen to this. Now, the Young Leaders Nexus is what I'm really about. It helps 18 to 30-year-olds become magnificent leaders, but we've got to address some of the elephants in the room. It's not just one elephant. Welcome to the podcast, Andrew.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Andrew, what is this testosterone crisis? Please give us an overview.
So, testosterone is described as the hormone that divides us and dominates us. And certainly it has a bad rap, I would say, in the press. There's two blokes scrapping in a pub. What's all that testosterone floating about in there? The banking crisis of 2008 that caused so much grief and is very much part of the 21st century that we've experienced. Was all that testosterone floating around on Wall Street? If only there was more estrogen in the world would be a nicer place. But we know that that's nonsense. So in the animal kingdom, if we talk about it in very simple terms, you go to a deer park just before Christmas with your kids, and there are two magnificent stags grazing side by side in the field, and isn't that lovely? Look at Rudolph and Prancer together, getting ready for the 24th, eating their grass so they fatten up for the night ahead. You take your kids back to that same deer park 3 months later, and Rudolph and Prancer are fighting to the death. And your kids are like, what's just happened? And you're like, well, kids, Rudolph wants all the female deer to himself, and he now wants to kill Prancer. And the reason for that is his testosterone levels have gone through the roof. Whereas before Christmas, they were very low. And so in the animal kingdom, of course, testosterone is at the heart of aggression, fighting for one's territory and mates and all the rest of it. But from what we know, and it starts to get very complicated, the way that human beings experience testosterone is more complex. We have a frontal cortex, we have a hugely evolved, complex society. So generally, what people say is it does give men a competitive edge. Any human being that has experienced puberty as a male will always have a physical advantage over a human being that hasn't. It does give men, often you see in boys, the need for rough and tumble. I see that having raised boys and girls. My boys just have to fight each other all the time. Usually it's good natured. It always ends in tears. It starts good natured anyway. But so there's that potential there, but that actually with humans it is slightly different. And what we know in science and research is in human beings, the impact of low testosterone is really serious. Your risk of heart disease goes up, your risk of diabetes goes up, your risk of certain forms of cancer goes up the lower your levels of testosterone. The lower your levels of testosterone, the more likely it is you are to be irritable, depressed, anxious. It's not just low libido. A lot of people say, low testosterone, so presumably that means erectile dysfunction, loss of sexual appetite. That's not that is the case, but there's so many more symptoms, so much more that it affects. And the problem, which is why I'm saying there's a crisis, is the levels of testosterone are falling off a cliff across all ages. There was a clickbaity kind of a stat that testosterone levels in the 1980s for men, what was considered normal for a guy in his early 60s, is now what is considered normal for a guy in his 20s. And although that has created a bit of controversy and debate, there are those that would refute that specific stat. Actually, when you look at the evidence, that clickbaity comment headline, not far off where we're at. And so in terms of male mental well-being, Of course, we need to encourage male entrepreneurs to talk, to look out for their well-being, to create community with other guys and be involved, to dare to be open and vulnerable about how they feel, to connect. All of that, absolutely crucial. And you should be regularly checking your bloods, going to the GP. If you are low in mood, if you are exhausted, it might just be that you need a better sleep pattern. It might really be that. It might be that you've been on the screen too much, but it might be that you have low vitamin D, which is one of the reasons why testosterone, that's linked to low testosterone. It could be low testosterone. And generally, younger guys in particular can reverse it quite easily as long as they make some changes to their lifestyle, some of which they'd be able to guess and some of which they wouldn't, which is presumably why we're doing this podcast. For older guys, you can do an amount to your testosterone drops off anyway as you get older. There is testosterone replacement therapy and that some older men are resorting to, but it's so important that as young entrepreneurs, we feel this pressure. We say, well, look, I'll work on my business. I'll worry about my health later on. And that sets up then your habits. And you keep saying that. So then kids come along. Yeah, well, I'll work on my business and be a dad. I'll worry about health can always wait until actually it can't wait. And then it's too late. And so my encouragement to entrepreneurs is to say, okay, there is a testosterone crisis. The reason you haven't heard very much about it is in the political system, men's health has generally taken a backseat, although that is changing. Educate yourself on testosterone. Educate yourself on the symptoms. Educate yourself on what it takes to build testosterone naturally. There's a lot of small tweaks you can make in your life that have a big impact, which I can go through now if that's helpful. But is there more? No. Does that make it clear to you, Harun?
Absolutely. So just to clarify, we're talking to young leaders, including young entrepreneurs. So it could be somebody working in a corporate environment. It applies across the board. First question, quick question with a quick answer perhaps, is you mentioned it can start at any age range. Is there, if you imagine a bell curve, what is the kind of youngest average age? I'm not talking about one person at 10 years of age, but what's the youngest age do you reckon this testosterone crisis begins? Would it go as young as teenagers?
Yeah, well, what we're seeing, there was some really interesting statistics that came out from America, quite a big piece of research, where what we're seeing in teenage boys, and we often think, I know when I was a teenager, I was doing lots of weights and I wanted to be the strongest and the toughest. But actually, the reality of grip test, which is a really good test of male strength, a male grip test, has fallen. The strength of male grip in teenage lads, sort of in the sort of 14 to 19 year bracket, has dropped by about 20% over the last 30, 40 years. That's quite staggering. Because it isn't just about grip. It's what that says about the wider physique. So it is changing. And like I say, what we now consider as normal for a guy in his 20s is what we'd have considered normal for a guy a lot older. Early 60s, according to this clickbaity stat, which does seem to be reasonably well backed up by what other data is saying. And the data is coming in from across the world, from studies across the world. And so therefore, what are some of the things causing that? And for me, there are some things causing this.
Can you stop answering my question, saying my question, please? That's my job.
Yeah.
What are the causes?
A lot of the causes, your listeners will probably be, as entrepreneurs, adopting a lifestyle that definitely will be a perfect storm of low testosterone because of what it demands now to be an entrepreneur. Most very busy entrepreneurs will be inside a lot. For example, low vitamin D is linked to low testosterone. 20% white British people are vitamin D deficient. Higher numbers of Afro-Caribbean and Asian people are vitamin D deficient. You can't eat enough of the right stuff to produce the vitamin D you need. It has to be sunlight, daylight. And so actually, even if you are young and you're feeling well, get your vitamin D tested. Let's see what it says. Yep. It may well be that vitamin D supplements through the winter months, especially. Now, for younger people, if they get outside in the summer months, just for sort of 15 or 20 minutes of where the sun's at its strongest, obviously you don't want to burn. There's that risk. But if it's for short periods of time, your skin can absorb the sunlight really well, but it becomes less able to do that as it gets older. So vitamin D is one thing to look out for. Sleep is huge. So they put men in a laboratory setting, those sleeping 8 hours versus those sleeping 5 hours. And those sleeping 5 hours, their testosterone levels the next day were 15% lower than those sleeping 8 hours. It was quite significant. Sugar. So every time I need to have my can of Coke, my sugar to stay awake, my Mars bar. Yeah, but so if you eat a Mars bar and drink a can of Coke, it's about 75 grams of sugar, your testosterone levels will plummet by 25% for the next 2 hours as your body's creating the insulin to deal with that sugar hit. It can't create the testosterone. And actually, sugar's everywhere in our diet.
It's interesting that back in the days, I'm a former martial arts champion, and I used to train 8 days a week. That's how much I trained. Back in the days, they used to have a Mars bar before you do some kind of event, like some kind of competition. And it's the worst thing because you're going to get a sugar slump and people don't realize it. So I think the advertising and the mainstream, the marketing narrative has actually, we can blame them and so on, but we really need to take responsibility. What about stress? How much does stress play in all of this?
Stress is another one. So if you are being chased down the road by a gang, your testosterone levels would go up to deal with this massive threat that you're facing temporarily to deal with it. However, what we know about lots of low level stress, like not being able to log onto the internet when you want to, someone's stolen your car, the low level stress that's not life or death, we know that plays a part in lowering testosterone because your body's dumping the cortisol into the system so it can't produce the testosterone it needs. So lots of low level stress is bad. So encouraging young entrepreneurs, genuinely, like some of the meditation, mindfulness stuff. I used to think that to do mindfulness, you needed sort of a mat, a yoga mat, an incense stick. You don't. Actually, you can practice mindfulness really easily at your desk, walking around, having your phone where the data, mobile and Wi-Fi is off for periods of the day might help. But mindfulness and finding that way to relax is really important. Heavy alcohol consumption reduces testosterone, moderate not so much. So if you're going to go teetotal, make sure you don't make the mistake of drinking lots of fizzy drinks and Coke and stuff because they've got loads of sugar in it. The problem with ultra processed food is this. Number one, you've got the sugar side of it. Number two, by its very nature, it's what's stripped from it tends to be the whole grains and the foods that are really abundant in vitamin B12, zinc and magnesium, all of which vitamin B12, zinc and magnesium are really important for testosterone creation. Sadly, you're not going to find them in a Marks and Spencer sandwich or at KFC or at Subway. You're going to find them in leafy greens, unprocessed meat, probably that you've cooked yourself, that's unprocessed.
But not sausages and bacon and stuff, because I once we had a conversation about someone who's actually quite fit telling somebody else about bacon. I was like horrified. And the other person said, well, Harun, of course you're going to say you're a Muslim because I have nothing to do with Muslim, mate. The trouble with pork, what people don't understand is pigs don't sweat. And so you know what they do with their toxins? They store it in the body. And so when you're eating the pork, you got a problem. But then bacon, of course, obviously highly processed, right? And salami and all that kind of stuff.
Highly processed. So you're talking unprocessed meat, not processed at all. Use magnesium, zinc, leafy greens, Mediterranean diet. That's just really important for building testosterone. And I think it's really easy as an entrepreneur to go, I'll just get a cheeky one from Subway. I'm busy, I'm working. It feels exciting to be working and building. So I'll just grab this, grab that food, and actually take time to prepare your own food and cook it from scratch. It's so important. Your health, it isn't just a given. You can't just take it for granted. No. So ultra processed food, bear in mind that over 50% of the UK diet is in fact ultra processed food, which is a very scary thought in itself. There is evidence to suggest that a sense of winning and purpose increases testosterone levels. Now, when I say suggest, it's just that for me, looking at the individual studies, the sample sizes aren't massive, but they do seem to indicate that when guys feel like they're winning, when they're making progress, when they have purpose, their testosterone levels do go up. So making sure, because the life of an entrepreneur is winning and losing. And often I've felt like I'm losing, I'm battling against battles I can't win. It can be very overwhelming. And so it's really important as guys that we stay connected into our community, that we have other things going on in our lives in case our entrepreneurial pursuits don't work out in the way that we want them to.
And remember, we're not just talking to entrepreneurs, we're also talking to people working in an office environment, young
Yeah,
leaders. A lot of what we're talking about also applies to females because there's this confusion that it's only men who have testosterone. Actually, women also have testosterone. Okay, just keep that
absolutely
in
right.
mind. Estrogen, it's thought that only women have estrogen. Oh, hello, men
Yeah.
have a lot of estrogen as well. So, there's this balance between the two. Andrew, tell us a bit about yourself. Who are you and why do you do what you do? Why are you helping so many people with this whole testosterone crisis issue?
So yeah, I'm a speaker and a podcaster. So I lead in my work on men's mental health, also talking about wider well-being topics such as burnout, decision making, time. They're all a big part of my work. I mean, really, how I got into this was about 15 years ago. I came out of a long-term violent and abusive marriage. I didn't talk about it at first. I was in quite a bad way, had quite a profound impact on my employment and sort of sense of self. And I rebuilt through did some coaching stuff, and I needed to emerge into a new job anyway because my recruitment business died in the recession. And I started doing just more training work to begin with, and then doing more sort of public speaking. But men's mental health has really become my passion. I am a man. I have 3 boys now under 11. And in talking about, I started opening up about what I've been through in the former abusive marriage. And it really interested me. There was a lot of positive stuff, as I'm sure you can imagine. There's a lot of kickback from guys and women saying, yes, but we must remember the vast majority of victims are women. It's male perpetrated, which actually, that's not the case at all if you look at the data. But it interested me, the backlash. It interests me a lot of the narrative about men, which hugely demonizes men. And I mean, I'm a feminist at heart. I'm passionate for equality. I'm liberal minded. But I do think, and there's a growing awareness that when it comes to areas of men's health, men's well-being, inclusion in the diversity, equality, and inclusion space, men have been largely left out of that. A lot of the language hasn't been helpful. And so all of that has created this interest. I won an award. I didn't even have to get any votes for it. I just was awarded an award, which is always a nice thing. As Campaign of the Year for Men and Boys Coalition, they're one of the main umbrella organisations for men and boys in the UK. For a lot of my sort of campaigning work, the way I talk about it. And so really it's been sort of a gradual passion that has really developed and taken me over. And you mentioned the testosterone crisis. I mean, that is one strand of managing male mental well-being, but an important one that is rarely talked about.
Now let's go back to one of the areas about you mentioned about grip strength. How can somebody improve their grip strength? I'm sure people figure it out, but for those who have no idea, how does one improve their grip
Well,
strength? So,
grip strength. The only thing with grip strength is that it's just as a indicator of general health. It's quite a useful indicator. So I wouldn't even be saying everyone must improve their grip strength. What I'm saying is that in terms of their overall health, it's a pretty useful measuring stick if there was one. So, and of course, the other factor to low testosterone, which you've nicely got me onto, is one around exercise. And I think it's not just about pumping iron at the gym. It's walking, it's playing football, it's going rowing, it's all of whatever it is, but becoming more active by choice. It's amazing. We think, oh, well, yeah, but I play football on a Friday. Yes, but probably the rest of the day, you either stood up or sat down. Most of us actually just sat down for long periods of time. So really building movement into your day. And we shouldn't be surprised. I don't know if you watch Dan Buettner's series on Netflix, The Blue Zone, it's called, about communities where people are living beyond 100 but in really good health. The 3 things, and they're all relevant for testosterone as well, are good, strong community. So they feel connected, have purpose. They eat their diet from scratch, whatever it is they eat, very different diets around the world, but it's cooked from scratch. And they are active. They wouldn't choose to get in the car or grab an Uber. They'd walk. They would park further. Well, they're probably not driving anymore if they're in their 90s, but they have habits that mean they're active. And it's so important as entrepreneurs, as where we're working in office, man, woman, person, whoever you are, that you stay active. And the thing with the testosterone, women do have testosterone. Men tend to have sort of 15 times more in our system. And of course, through male puberty, that goes up to sort of 20 to 30 times more, which is why when we put young chaps in the classroom hour after hour, it's probably not a great fit for their stage of life, but we continue to do so. And again, in terms of why are young men struggling, the way we've said, I think teachers generally today are really working hard to encourage more creative thinking, but I don't think that the system and budgets and the whole setup helps them. And I think there is a rethink around boys that we need to consider because of this testosterone.
Every day I'm speaking to different business leaders, and even today, this morning. And the biggest issues with these employers and business leaders is this: education system is not fit for purpose. It's not preparing young people for entrepreneurship. It's not preparing young people for leadership. It is still following that Victorian system. The trouble is there's such a mismatch. Poor teachers, they can only do what they're told to do. And we need a lot more political willpower and integration between the two communities, because you know what, at the end of the day, sorry politicians, well actually sorry but not sorry, you guys are doing a lousy job. You think you're doing a good job, you really need to wake up. I'll just say it, I'm apolitical, I don't take any sides. Now, for those of you who want to find out more about recipes, of course, I've got on my other YouTube channel, actually, it's Harun Rabbani podcast. I'll put that in the show notes. You can check that out. I've got over 200 videos actually in the kind of nutritional field that we're talking about. I actually cover that. A number of years ago, I interviewed Dr. John Gray, who wrote Men Are From Mars, Women Are From...
Interesting. Yeah, no, I've read the book.
And great guy. And we talked about various things. One of the things we talked about was how men are emasculated by females, not intentionally. Tell me your thoughts on this, by the way. I'd like, maybe it's totally wrong now or something. So, in general, men, we're problem solvers. Someone talks about a problem, we have different, we'll come up with a solution. And what men tend to do is, because we're problem solvers, that's how we get our value. We feel like we're wanted, we're needed. On the other hand, female tend to be more nurturers. So sticking to the men's side, which is really what I want to talk about, a lot of relationship issues seems to come from a relationship where the female is telling the male, oh yeah, you need to do this, this, and this, and you'll end up with the solution. I'll give you a real life example. So I was talking to the wife of a billionaire, actually, from the Middle East. The guy owns a big shipping company. He's doing very well. Their relationship, and she's like, relative to his age, I guess she was very young, former model and so on, very switched on entrepreneur. She was finding that the relation, I'm not going to go into intimate detail at all, by the way. She was having relationship issues, and I do this for him, and I help him to figure out his HR, and I tell him what he needs to do. And I said, and when she was telling me all the things she was fixing, I said, okay, that's interesting. And since then, her husband's been less and less involved in the relationship. He stays away at work. In essence, she's telling him how to do his job. This is what Dr. John Gray was talking about, that it's very important we don't ignore the fact, men, we don't ignore the fact that we're natural problem solvers, and we need to ensure that there's some kind of boundary and, ensure that we don't leave that space. What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's spectrums. So for example, there is sort of clinical evidence that seems to suggest that, I mean, I don't fit this, by the way, but that boys, men are more interested in sort of objects and things and how they work. Women are more interested in relationships and people. I don't fit that. If something's broken at home, I'll swear at it and hit it with a hammer. But if I've got a people problem, I have endless patience. But the point is that clinical research seems to suggest these traits are quite strong. Like if you look at the numbers, and so there's a whole argument around STEM. If that's the case, how far do we go in pushing STEM? How do we get, for me, the bigger and more important thing than more women into STEM is how do we get people to understand what their calling is, to connect with it. And for those women that are more object focused and so get them in, please do, and vice versa. But for me, it's more about people rather than just women in STEM, women in STEM. And we should bear in mind just with the STEM, that doesn't include nursing, midwifery and psychotherapy. They're left out of STEM topics, even though they are science-based topics. I think we need to appreciate more and not be afraid to have the conversation that men and women are different. We are biologically different. Our brains work differently, even down to, and I'm going to be very risque here, but you'll see where I'm going with this. I was reading only recently that I don't believe any comment that says women belong in the kitchen is misogynistic nonsense, which I don't subscribe to. However, women have more taste receptors on their tongues, and I think it can be argued are more reliable. They should dominate in all the top MasterChef restaurants as chefs because they have a natural advantage, which we should encourage them to say, look, you have the advantage here. They should be the greater number of wine connoisseurs, whiskey connoisseurs, because they can pull out the more complex flavors more effectively than men. Let's not be afraid to have that conversation. Let's understand men and women are different. Let's understand there are spectrums and trends. It's not a cut and dry thing. It's not a black and white thing. So in answer to your question, men and women are different. I think in terms of male mental health, because we maybe have that leaning towards wanting to fix problems, I'd say because society is so challenging, it's hard for us to fix problems today. Society is broken, and that's partly why we're struggling as much as we are.
You're listening to the Young Leaders podcast, and I'm with Andrew Payne, who's a professional speaker. Andrew, I know that you speak on stage, you speak at all sorts of organizations. How can people get hold of you before we do the top 5 or top 7 habits that people can integrate into their life?
LinkedIn. I'm really easy to find. My surname is Payne, spelled P-A-I-N. My initial is A. There's not many people with the surname Payne whose parents were daft enough to give them the initial A. So I'm really easy to find. My website's easy to find, Andrew Payne. I'm a speaker. You put Andrew Payne speaker into Google, you'll find me all day long. Do reach out. I'm always happy to connect with whoever. I have my own podcast, Men on Show. So if you like a good podcast like this one, do give it a thumbs up and a cheeky listen. That'd be great.
So let's finish quick fire round. Well, quick fire round is actually you're going to quick fire on your own. Top 5 or maybe top 7 habits that people can integrate, so men can integrate into their life, which will help boost their testosterone. I know we covered a lot, but which will help boost their testosterone levels.
Cook from scratch and learn to cook. It won't be easy. Getting rid of ultra processed food is not easy. Me and my wife are still working at it. It's hard. We have a family. It will be more expensive, but do it. Please cook from scratch. Never, ever stop exercising and being active. I know it's difficult. It's hard to find the time. Even if it's just 10 minutes of doing press-ups every other day at home, that's all you do. Do it. Create those habits where you're just walking more. If there's a lift in the building, don't get in it if you don't need to. Take the stairs if you can. Definitely stay plugged into communities somewhere, something that takes you out of your work. Otherwise, it's amazing how boring and narrow-minded you can become if you only do your work. Creativity is from connecting lots of dots, so you need to get out there and have community. Please do that, which includes getting outside, daylight. Do not be someone that just stays inside, even if you're working in an office. It's very hard to do that, but bear that in mind. And what my 5th one would be is around, definitely, it would have to be around sleep. As someone who has suffered horrendous sleep deprivation because I have young children, I know how effective my judgment comes because of that. Do not think that you're so special that you can get by on less sleep. You can't. Do not sacrifice sleep.
We have a world where there's a lot of challenges, not just locally or nationally here in the UK, but globally. Wouldn't it be amazing if we had a new level of consciousness amongst our young leaders? So even from teenage onwards, what would be your one message, final message you want to leave our audience to help build a better world?
Taking the time to really educate yourself on issues that you're going to have an opinion on. There's so much rubbish out there. So if you're going to form an opinion or a belief, always ask, what if I'm wrong? Do your fact checking as much as you can. There are fact checking sites that help you. When you hear about politicians, their manifestos, their claims, take the time to fact check. When you're making your own decisions, take that time. There's a lot of stuff out there on gut-based thinking. Our guts are horribly flawed. So take time to examine your beliefs and be mindful of where you go for your news and information.
Brilliant piece of advice. Did not expect it at all. Andrew Payne, you've been absolutely brilliant. We definitely need to have you on the show again in the future, talking about other topics, of course, because you cover such a wide range. Everybody else, thank you so much for listening, and you'll probably hear this on YouTube as well. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, and make sure you like, love, follow, share, and all that kind of usual stuff. And the details of Andrew, all of that, LinkedIn, etc., is in the show notes. Thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Bye for now.